Welcome, Jabari Hayes, aka Miles.
Thank you for having me.
So, quick bio. Jabari Hayes Sr., aka Miles. You were born in the Gowanus projects in Brooklyn, New York. You moved to St. Louis as a high schooler to escape your surroundings with your father, and you eventually landed in Atlanta. In 1989, at age 17, you start college at St. Louis Community College, but then you get a track scholarship and become an All-American track star at Morehouse College. It was during this time that you started selling weed through your older cousin, Q. And on March 16th of 2004, you were pulled over in a Lincoln Town Car limousine and found to be in possession of well over $500,000 in cash. 26 days later, on Easter Sunday, you were stopped again in a mobile home in which a little over 103 kilos of cocaine were discovered. You were sentenced on November 19th, 2004. You first received a 60-month sentence, and you thought you'd won in the Eastern District of Missouri, St. Louis. But 11 months after you'd already been incarcerated, the feds came and indicted you in the BMF case, which was coming out of the Eastern District of Michigan in Detroit. And that case resulted in an additional sentence of 87 months for interstate trafficking in aid of racketeering. So technically, you'd been sentenced to a total of 153 months, or just under 13 years. While serving your sentence, you made the decision to never return to the life that led you there, although it took more than 3 years for you to come to that decision. On May 27, 2010, you were released from federal prison in Atlanta. You had served 5 years, 6 months, and 19 days. Today, you're a loving husband and devoted father of 3. You operate a thriving collision center in Atlanta. In 2017, you released a critically acclaimed documentary, Miles in the Life, which chronicles your life's journey and became a vessel of hope for those currently incarcerated as well as those recently released. As a credible messenger, you share your darkest moments, fears, failures, and triumphs so that those who are currently in struggle can find the self-discipline to make better life choices. Appreciate you. So, what was life like for you as a kid growing up in one of Brooklyn's most notorious housing complexes?
Life for me in Gowanus projects at the time when I was there was filled with wild escapades of kids and teenagers on top of each other, where on any given night on the weekends, you could have the Boricuas with their trumpets and their merengue salsa, the Jamaicans with the steel drums. Before crack cocaine hit, it was just a place where a lot of poor people were, but it was in semi-harmony, almost like a tribe.
Okay. When did you first realize that there was a problem at home?
I first realized there was a problem at home in Gowanus projects when there was no rice, there were no pennies in between the couch, and we were really on our knuckles. When I would come in the house, I guess my mother's, her last dignity was when her and her friends would smoke crack cocaine. She wouldn't let me in the house. She'd have the deadbolt on, and then she would cover my eyes. She covered my eyes. Her hand is only so big. I could see, I could smell the crack, I could hear the sizzle, but it was when that hit, when my mother was full on, not freebasing, not sniffing coke, that it was the rich person's thing, and our lives started to deteriorate. Everything changed for us. The world was flipped upside down for my family when crack hit in Gowanus projects.
When did you start to attempt to fend for yourself? When did you start hustling?
Well, my first trafficking job was when I was 6 years old. I was going next door to the Rastas back then. They used to sell that Jamaican dirt weed, so they used to call it reefers. And I went and got a tray bag of weed. When they used to have them in little manila envelopes in New York, I went there. It was my first trafficking job. So I started hustling then, and my father would have me out in the corners in front of the A&P. Everybody from New York, you know the A&P grocery store. So I used to sell bottles. I used to sell women's shoes. So I had to learn at a young age, at 6, 7, 8 years old, how to deal with adults, how to sell, how not to get robbed. And that's how I really learned how to count, because nobody paid with credit cards or checks. Everything was cash. So when you on the street and you selling bottles or you selling shoes or whatever my father found and put his 2 sons out there to sell, you had to be quick on your feet. You had to know money. You had to know how to relate to people, how to talk to adults, how not to get beat, who to watch that was the kids that was trying to rob you or adults was trying to rob you. Because, my father, he put us out there real early to start selling things, whatever those things were. It was no drugs at that time, but he put us in a position to really learn quick on our feet.
So your father was around during the period that you were basically surviving, living in a crack house.
Yes. Yep.
And for a period he was engaged, but for a period he was unaware of the conditions of your mother's home. How is that? How was he there and not there is my question, I guess.
That's a really good question. How was my father there and not there when my mother was full on smoking crack apartment, the boomingest crack house ever in Gowanus project's history? It's really crazy that during that time, this was a plague that nobody believed really existed until you saw it for your own eyes. And back then, kids didn't have beepers. They didn't have cell phones. So you gonna smoke crack or pay a phone bill? So my mother didn't have a phone, right? So I would just tell my father I was at my mother's. And I'd tell my mother I was at my father's so I could run free, because who was checking for me? I'd still show up to school. I'd show up late every day, but people really in the early, not in the late 80s, but like 82, 83, 84, 85, crack was so new. And even the laws hadn't even changed for crack. Like, it was just the wild, wild west, and people just couldn't believe that this person who was sane at one time and looked a certain way at one time, that they had completely morphed into a different human being. So it was easier then because it wasn't cell phones, it wasn't social media, it wasn't any emails. So they didn't talk, they were separated, and the kids ran wild. So that's why my father didn't know.
Okay. When you initially left New York, you went to St. Louis. And the reason for you leaving New York was because of the disorganization of your mom's home, once your father came to understand that this was happening. So you go to St. Louis. You're a new kid. You're from New York during the time where being from New York in any place south of New York or west of New York was like a big deal, right? So you're a popular kid, and you start to run with a particular group of kids. Now you've already been hustling. You've already been selling a little weed. You've been obviously overexposed to the underworld. How does this translate in your new environment?
When I left New York at the age of 13 in 1986, it was a blessing that my parents, before crack cocaine hit, they gave me experience and exposure. I went to St. Louis for the summer and I saw people live differently. And it was like, do you want to live in a crack house? Or do you want to go someplace where people have meals, where people eat, people aren't fighting, they aren't stabbing each other, they aren't shooting, there's no kick-ins, and it's not 4 people staying in your room because your mom rented out your room, so it was a no-brainer for me to go to St. Louis. But when I got to St. Louis, I was definitely a Martian. It was a complete culture shock for me. They had to test me because they thought my hearing was bad. I couldn't understand them in St. Louis, and they couldn't understand me. I had a really, really, really thick New York accent. And St. Louis people, they slur their R's. So it's over der and over her and I don't care and kern and earn. So I kept saying, huh? what? Like, what? And the high school I went to was like Beverly Hills High. For me, I had never had a microwave in my house. And I went to high school and they had a whole row of them. I had never seen, like, nobody in my community had a car. And I went to St. Louis, the juniors and seniors, they had their own cars and they had parking spaces. In New York, the only people that ride the yellow school buses, special needs, and all the kids that didn't drive rode the school bus. So I was definitely a Martian, a fish out of water. And the funny thing about kids and human beings is even though they're in a better situation, they gravitate towards what they know. So I knew tough kids, kids that fought, kids that didn't care if it was a teacher, they fight them. The kids that got down. Like, so for me, I thought I discovered white people too. I had one white dude out of 9 years in school, including kindergarten. I never had one white dude in my whole school. It was all in New York, West Indians and Boricuas, Dominicans, Africans. I'd never seen or never been in, except for one time, in class with a white person. And it was 85% of them. So it was a huge culture shock. I couldn't go buy beer in New York. The bodegas on the corner and the Arabs, you go there, they don't care if you buy beer. You could be 10 years old. They're going to sell you a 12-pack, a 40-ounce, 64-ounce. They didn't care a quart, right? But when I went to St. Louis, man, they had rules. People actually waved at each other. People had houses. People had food on the table. Crack hadn't hit St. Louis yet. So it was a culture shock. And being around white people, I had never been around them. I had never been around them in class. So it was huge to me. It was a big, big, big change. And the kids used to want to hear me say, I say ball now, but they wanted to hear me say ball. They just wanted to hear me speak. It was like I was a foreign exchange student, you know? I was like this big novelty, but my accent is gone now.
Who is your cousin Q?
Q, don't let my family know this, is my favorite cousin. He liked everything I liked when I got to St. Louis. He liked girls, he liked dancing, he liked stealing cars at night from his mother so we could go out. It was like he was my only male. I had a lot of cousins, but they were mostly young women. He was my only male cousin that was my age, that was into the things that I was into. He liked to fight, all of that stuff. So he was my best cousin in the world.
What was his influence on you once you got there?
He had a good influence on me because I had somebody that was like me, and I was used to having my crew in New York, and I didn't have that in St. Louis. And everything about New York is you have a crew. You have your set of friends. Y'all ride or die for each other, and I didn't have that in St. Louis. And when him and I got together, it was instant. And he was the main reason I had a pass into the life, because after we were kids, he went on and he took off. Like we hadn't seen each other in years. And the next time I saw him, that's when crack hit St. Louis, and he was a multi-millionaire, and I wanted in. And at that time, he wouldn't let me hustle. He would not. He's like, you're gonna go to college. I'm not. And he told everybody, don't sell him nothing. He can't work. He told the whole city. So in St. Louis, it was nothing I could do. I could maybe get some dirt weed or something, but nobody on any level that was doing anything, they wouldn't let me work because of him.
That's a good cousin.
Yeah, that's a good cousin.
So who did you meet first, and how did you meet him between Terry and Meech?
Oh, it was Meech first. A lot of people don't know, when Terry, and Meech left Detroit, they got work out of St. Louis. And my cousin, Q, was the biggest in St. Louis. So that's how the relationship is. They're always tight. He never fell out with either one of them with the sibling rivalry or whatever that is. So he was a segue in everything, but it was mutual. It wasn't like one worked for the other. They were on the same level. In this drug world, sometimes your plug goes out, sometimes her plug goes out. So you got to go to him because you want to keep business going. You still got to provide for your people, So that's how the relationship. So it was primarily with Meech.
So Q was the conduit between you and the fam.
Oh yeah, and then J-Bo.
And Jay?
A lot of people don't know about J-Bo is that we were on this Junior Olympics track team in St. Louis, and he actually was a good football player, had scholarship offers, and was a even better track runner and had scholarship offers. But he took another route to the streets. But we had ran summer track together, Junior Olympics, and we were at rival schools, so we knew of each other, was mutual respect. And once everybody came to Atlanta, it was a different ball game. All bets was off then.
At some point, you began to drive. How does that come about? How does you driving for the fam begin?
How does me driving for BMF, Black Mafia Family, begin? Well, first, I always want to put this disclaimer. There's a 60-month statute of limitation, right? Some crimes like murder, which I have no idea about, never participated in, never did anything associated with that. That statute of limitation is infinite. But for drugs, there's a statute of limitation. So I can speak on these things, Cavario. I first started driving for Q in the 90s for my cousin, right? After, we were grown then, so he couldn't stop me. So I might as well be on his team, right? So I had drove for my cousin Q and then another guy.
What were the runs?
It was back then in the 90s, the major run was I-75. It was out of Miami. You go up Miami, you go straight up 95, that's to New York and the Eastern Seaboard. Then you go up 75 to Atlanta, to Detroit, Ohio, and all the rest of them. Sometimes you could go through Alligator Alley. Sometimes you could take the most vicious turnpike, the Florida Turnpike through Orlando and that there. So that was the route that everybody used to take. And then it switched. It was a lot of Boricuas and Mexicans in Chicago. So that was a great run from Chicago to St. Louis. You could ping pong that all day and never get tired because even driving the speed limit is a 4.5 hour drive. And then if you had a Missouri car in Illinois, it doesn't look crazy. When you got a Florida car in California, that looks crazy. You always got to think, what are the police thinking? What is their mindset? What are they looking for? They run in place, they looking at plates. What looks odd? So that was the run for the most part. Miami, and then it was a big Chicago run too. There was a lot of work in Chicago years ago.
So for Q, you would do the pickup, you'd go and you deliver the money to the connect and pick up the work, or
allegedly, number one, right? But a lot of people think that, to answer the question, with different crews, there's a different structure. And it's like a cell. This person driving doesn't ever touch the connect, doesn't ever touch this other person. So it insulates everybody. So when you drive in certain crews, you go from one place and then you have a person that and that only and that person gets to work. And then they go to another house with the work, right? And then they disperse it from there or wherever. But it was always a cutoff, kind of like how terrorist cells run. You know what I mean? That these people know nothing about what these people do. So if these people know nothing about what these people are doing, nobody could tell on each other. So it won't, cross-contaminate each other. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I would like to amend it with, did you have to stop in multiple cities? Was Q operating at that level where you'd have to make stops in multiple cities to let loads be picked up?
With my cousin, there was multiple cities, but not multiple drivers. That driver had that particular city. That driver didn't see the other city, so that they So to insulate that driver from going from here to Chicago and then from Chicago to Ohio, it was different legs.
So it's kind of like a relay system. Okay, so at some point you transition out of your cousin Q's operation and you become part of the Black Mafia family operation. How does that transition happen?
The transition from my family's business in the drug world to Black Mafia family, everybody in Atlanta, everybody in the 80s and early 90s and late 90s came to Atlanta because you could wear your jewelry, you could drive whatever car, because it was politicians, it was corporate people, it was entertainers, athletes, and just land. It was a black class of people who were rich, that looked like you, that dressed like you. If you had braids, the politicians had braids, so you could blend in. So if you had a Ferrari, you didn't look like, if you were in St. Louis, you had a Ferrari, you done. You could drive that car for 2 days and that's it. You might as well sell it or burn it or whatever the case is, because they're on that car every place it goes. So Atlanta was the hub for all of the nation's, well, the majority of the nation's black drug dealers. And at that time, I had a valet parking business, the parking and unparking of cars, and I also had a limousine business. So I had the connection with my cousin Q because he knew everybody. Therefore, I was Q's cousin, so I got a pass. Right? And then working at all of the clubs and going to the clubs and doing limousine runs, I knew everybody too, because all of the clubs they were going to, I was working there, and then I'd go in the club afterwards. I owned my own valet parking company and limousine company, so I was familiar with everybody. And I was selling weed back then too, and if they wanted weed or they wanted guns or whatever they wanted, city, I had it, right? So, and they trusted me, so I had access to all of the crews in Atlanta, especially with the smoke, because they all smoked.
Right. So your introduction to the family is initially by way of Meech via your connection with your cousin Q and with J-Bo.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And so how do you initiate your first run? And what does that look like?
The first run with BMF, well, let me back up. You can never ask really to be into BMF. You have to be recruited, right? And the person who recruited me was J-Bo. And my connection was J-Bo was from St. Louis, and we ran track together and were rival high schools. And J-Bo knew my cousin Q, and they used to work together, allegedly, back in the day. And so it's just a small circle. It's just like billionaires. All other billionaires know each other. All other 100 millionaires know each other. It's this small network that the rest of the world doesn't know about. But in this circles, because you all go to the same country club. Billionaires go to country clubs. Millionaire, 100 millionaire black drug dealers, they go to the strip club. So that's our country club, and they have to see something in you in order to recruit you. Because I had been around for years. I had been at houses, had cars with them, stayed over my house. They played the video games, smoked, I sold them weed, everything. But never, ever did they talk about any work. Never, ever did they talk about any money other than liquor money for Cristal or for weed or for food. They never talked about any drugs for years. And then the time came. What people don't know is, in order to get into this life, somebody has to die or be killed, either way, or they have to go to prison for a position to open. Yeah, that position just doesn't open for you. Somebody goes to prison or somebody dies, period, right? Like, that's what it is. So somebody got popped, and when there was a split between T and Meech, when they both went their separate ways, they took their drivers, they took their men, and everybody had their separate crews. So now it was a position that needed to be filled, and then another driver got hit in Texas. So after all of these years, of not knowing nothing, not knowing where, not knowing. I never saw prior to being recruited by BMF, I never saw any work. I never heard of any talk of any cocaine or anything. All it was playing the game, drinking Cristal, smoking weed, popping pills, drinking 1800 tequila, and having a good time, and talking about cars. We talked about cars for days, but it was never a iota, not a bag or nothing. I never saw not a morsel of cocaine in the beginning.
Okay, now you incorporate it. That first initial run, how does that come about, and what does it look like?
How does the first run, or how does the first recruitment look? Is that what you're asking?
The first run.
Okay.
You're already recruited.
Okay. My first run with BMF was as simple as hey, why don't you come out to Texas? It was a very simple conversation.
But you knew when you got, it was a call.
Oh, yeah. It was a call. It was that call.
And you knew it was that call.
It was that call. And it was very...
Had you been waiting for it?
Oh, yeah, I've been waiting. I have been waiting since I knew it was coming. I knew the call was coming to be a driver for BMF, which was, in the drug world, the most prestigious job ever, right? I know this sounds crazy, but this was the most prestigious job to drive for BMF. Prior to that, the groundwork started at Meech's birthday at the Four Seasons at the presidential suite. It was like an interview, but it was not like any interview you've ever seen in your life. It was a bunch of bottles. It was a bunch of strippers, dancers, whatever you want to call them. It was a bunch of weed, and it was six-figure dudes that roll up blunts. And it was, in hindsight, all eyes were on you, but then it was just a party, but it was really an interview. But the first job with BMF started with a simple call. Hey, why don't you book a flight to Texas, to Dallas? And that was it. And it wasn't, hey, well, where do I go to? You don't know none of that. It's just book a flight. When you get there, you get there. Then you call. And then after the call, they pick you up, drive you around, and then it's another confirmation like, hey, is this something that you want to do? And it's like, hey, pass the salt. It's as cool and calm as pass the salt. There's no fear in passing the salt. You don't think twice about passing the salt. It's like, hey, do you want the salt or no? And it was, of course, okay. And it was on.
So they bring you into this menagerie of vice. I'm very familiar with with this process that you're talking about. Yeah. They bring you to this menagerie of vice to see how you respond to the temptations. They put all the temptations in place. They put the chicks, they put the drugs, money, the flash, put it all on display. I remember this. Mm-hmm. And they see how you react. Mm-hmm. Which is it's a good way to really see where somebody is, for real. And then you get an idea of what degree, if to any degree, they could be useful, depending on how they respond to certain things, how much access they could be given. So obviously you passed that with flying colors because you were given the access, the most pivotal position in the entire organization, realistically, without you being effective in what you do, none of the other stuff works. So your first run, do you have at any point, do you have an idea of what it is you're carrying?
My first run, I had no idea of what I was carrying, what vehicle I would be in, how many would be in there, and where I was going. As you're about to leave, it's, hey, look, we want you to go to this city. There's no address or this person, and you'll get a call. So you just do what you do and call us every couple hours. If you get any issues, make sure you call us. If they're pulling you over, call us immediately. Let us know the mile marker you're at, what city you're in, everything. We got you. It is the paramount thing with BMF is such a security blanket and such a collective of men moving in the same direction that are willing to die for you, that you're not nervous because nobody else is nervous. Does that make sense?
Yes. Insulation. Yeah. So what does it take to be a driver?
What it takes to be a driver is a certain level of sickness. You have to be a greedy, adrenaline junkie who is fearless but only has a little fear just to keep you sane. And you have to be willing to leave everything in your life that you love within seconds. And not in a fictitious movie way, like I could be gone in 60 seconds. No, everybody and everybody else in your life does not matter at this time right here. These drugs, this money getting from point A to point B is the only thing in your life that matters. Nothing else before, nothing else after, only this moment. You have to be so far gone into what you're doing that you are willing to die that second, that next hour for what you're doing. No questions asked.
What was that pay like initially?
The pay with BMF was a kind of Walmart pay. Not Walmart as in cheap, but Walmart as in volume. You were paid based on the load, right? But you were paid on the frequency. Other crews paid more money than BMF, but you never made more money than with BMF. BMF was at such a rapid pace. As soon as that car hit, that car was going back out. We were ping-ponging. It was two drivers. We're going cross country. We're putting 300,000 miles in a year on a car easily, and that was just one car. So our cars never stopped. We probably got weekly oil changes. That's the only times our cars really slowed down. And they were new, and they were super superbly maintained. So man, the pay, it could be anywhere on the low end, 20,000 to 100,000. So that goes back
for a single run.
For a single run. So that goes back to the other question of what does it take to be a driver? It takes a level of sickness. It takes a level of greed. It takes a huge, huge adrenaline junkie to get in that car, to know that it's 100+ kilos of cocaine, that you could be kidnapped, robbed, and murdered, that your mind, you have to be a really sick individual to see, everybody can get in the car once. Oh, I got the nerve, I'm gonna do this. And you get paid, you get $100,000, most money you ever had. But the sickness comes in where, what's better than money? More money, right? Like, why am I gonna stop at 100,000? What I'm gonna do with 100,000? Like, what's $100,000? Like, they got $100,000 in wheels in the driveway, just on the cars. I'm not talking about body kits of the cars. I'm talking about wheels when rims was $10,000 and $12,000 back then, right? So you have to be a individual that is greedy. You have to know that you could be kidnapped, robbed, murdered, and your family could be duct taped, and to get in that car week after week and sit in that seat, your mind is so far gone. You ain't on this earth. You like this created, I don't know what to say. You're like this created, built machine, because you're void of all feelings, because you don't give a fuck about your family. The biggest lie we say is, I'm doing this for my family. No, you're doing this for the mob and yourself. BMF comes first, second, third. Ain't no family, your mother, your father, your baby. They don't give a fuck. You don't give a fuck. Everybody's moving the same way, and we getting this fucking money. I don't give a fuck if I had the flu, if I had pneumonia. I got my ass behind that fucking seat, and I drove my ass from California to Georgia to Nashville to wherever. We don't play that shit. We don't care if you're sick. We don't care if your mama died. We don't care if your kid was born. We don't care if your woman is sick, if she just had a miscarriage, if she just is on her deathbed. You get your ass in that seat, because all of us gonna do the same.
So at this point, you're making 100 racks a run. A run takes a few days. What are you telling your family you're doing for a living?
Oh, what did I tell my family when I was in BMF that I did for a living? I told them I was in the music business. And because I had pictures with Nelly or Fabulous or Diddy or people seeing me at the club or something like that, they bought it. And plus I had limousine, so it was the perfect cover. So if I came in town and my family saw me with a limousine, it's just his limousine company. He's taking around his artists. I've even taken some of my family strategically to the studio so they could see all of the rappers and all of this. So that I knew they were going to go back and tell the rest of my family, oh, I met this person, I met that person. So I had to keep the cover. And plus, I always had cars because I had a limousine company and I had a valet parking business. The music was a natural transition. So my family, until I got sentenced, my mother didn't know what I did. Like I picked her up in the limo and she saw me. I would make sure when mother came in town, I'd put on my uniform and I'd go work at the valet spot, and then I'd eat dinner with her and I'd have my friend take her home. So, your job is never to have your family worry, and it's also to stay away from your family too. So.
How did you earn the nickname Miles?
But it couldn't call me. I earned the nickname Miles because I didn't care what storm, what time, what police was out, whatever. I was about getting the bag from A to B. So you can't say, hey Jabari, you can't put your government name out there when you're on the phone. So it was the nickname. It was kind of a nerd nickname that fit me. And it was the actual miles that I put on the road. And that I was relentless. I took the same attributes that made me an All-American athlete in track and field, and I took that to driving. So I would drive cross country doing the speed limit in a limo and stop maybe 3 times for a half hour, but I would be so hyped and so wide open internally. I hated no-dos and all of that stuff. And it was impressive because people didn't do the out in track and field. You always think about PBs, personal bests, or PRs, personal records. I always wanted the record for the most kilos. I always wanted the record for the safest driving, not getting busted from point A to point B. I also wanted to be the driver that took the most money. I always wanted more to separate myself from any other drivers. So it was a competition thing for me. So that's how they gave me the name Miles.
What does it feel like to have millions of dollars or hundreds of keys in your vehicle?
At that time, it felt like just Monday, or today is Thursday. It just felt like Thursday. It is, in the beginning, it's like when you see $1 million, it's like that first time you have sex, or the first time you see that naked woman and she's willing to have sex with you, and you like, I'm going to have sex with this beautiful being. And it just stick you until somebody like, hey, what the fuck you doing, man? Come on, man, we got to wrap this shit up. And you snap in, or the first time you see 100 kilos of cocaine, you will never be the same. Because if you're in a business, everybody want to hustle to get 1, 5, or 10, or maybe 50. But when you see 100, they bruised, battered, and scarred, and they oblong. Some of them are half, some of them are 2, some of them are 1, some of them busted open, some of them got the V in it because they tested the cocaine, and you looking at it like, this is fucking incredible. Like, it's weird because it becomes like this furniture right here. It's just part of the job. But this furniture is valuable. You know that people are trying to kill you for it, and they're willing to give their lives for this furniture, but unless you see like 1,000 or 10,000 at a time, it just doesn't impress you anymore. But in the beginning, you stuck. It's like you remember that first time you had sex? You remember the first time you ever bust that nut? And it was like incredible. First time you see $1 million, You feel 100 kilos of cocaine. It's nothing like it in the world. And you speechless. Because in the beginning, you know that this is a life sentence. You know that everybody could go to jail, right? You like, what, it's like you stuck for a second, but then it just becomes muscle memory. It's just work, you know? So that first time he has a doozy.
It's like when you see it, at the point at which you see it, you realize all things are possible.
Oh yeah. It's almost a euphoric feeling when you see it, because you know everything that you get ready to do from now on has changed. Mm-hmm. It's like almost like that NBA player or NFL player becomes a draft pick, and you know the trajectory of your life has changed. When you see that work, you're like, man, everything's different now. My whole thought pattern. I ain't thinking starter homes. I ain't thinking $1 million homes or home. You thinking multi-million-dollar houses on each coast, and like anything you could ever want. Like it's nothing with that money and that work, is nothing on this earth that you can't buy.
How many successful runs did you do?
How many successful runs did I do? I really don't know. Yeah, I stopped counting because.
At what point?
I think it was after 50, I stopped counting, because with BMF, people don't understand. As much as you want to drive, they got as much work for you. It's never a shortage of work. It's never a shortage of kilos of cocaine or millions of dollars for BMF. As Meech told the Connect one time, the Connect asked Meech, well, how many can you do? He said, how many can I do? He told the Connect, a cartel, not just somebody selling. He said, you ain't got enough. You bring 10,000, I'm gonna sell 10,000. You bring 100,000, I'm gonna sell 100,000. You ain't got enough. And he meant it too. So when you're driving from BMF, they're gonna give you're gonna be all you can be. And they stopped me a couple of times because I was delirious. One time, my personal record is I did Atlanta to California, back to California and back with only 6 hours of straight sleep. And that was the time where they were like, all right, you need to take a rest. Because I did it in under a week. And this was balls against the wall, straight driving. It's use the restroom, get something to eat, sleep. As soon as your body is up, they done already got the car washed up, the limo, they done got everything back together, and you going.
This is a 4,600 mile round trip.
Yeah, I was so delirious that they asked me, they were like, hey, put 10 bricks over there. And I think I put 12. I was beyond failure. That on the road, that's the first time I ever fell asleep with my eyes open. I hallucinated so much that I first started having one person in the car in my imagination. And then as the third leg of that trip is when I had a second person in the car. And it was just, I was way, way, way out there. So they sat me down that time, and I think that's the only time they ever said, hey, you got to stop. You got to stop. So yeah, but in BMF, it's never enough. We work on speed. And when I talk about Walmart, how Walmart crushed Kmart, is volume. It's volume. Y'all sell 50 t-shirts at $1 profit. We're going to sell 1,000 at 50 cent profit. We're going to sew up the whole market and not fire one shot.
That run that you did, that back-to-back, that's when I remember starting to call you Miles.
Mm. Yeah.
That run.
Yeah.
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 How involved were you in the preparation for a run?
I was involved in the preparation for a run when it came to that work or that money going into that car. Because
How involved, though? Did you
I,
personally place the money or the material into the vehicle, into the stash compartment?
depending on who was loading up the cars, that's when I became involved. When two people, I'll keep them out of this, but when they became involved, I almost never went over their work. Everybody else, it was because I was the alpha and omega in that car. Everything started with me, everything ended with me. So this car had to be right because my life was on the line. That little, when you trying to force it in the car and it cuts that kilo that's duct taped and it goes down, that could put this car, this work, me at risk. Now I'm gone, the car's gone, the work is gone, we got to get lawyers and everything else. So I was involved with it when it wasn't my crew, because people think BMF was all of these hundreds of people, but it was a small core group of us that actually did the work, and that just weren't witnesses or just hanger-ons or just trying to party. It was a small core of us that people, they don't really get it because with so many people around that are flashy and all the rest of this, you don't know who's who. So it was kind of like smoke and mirrors. But this core group, when they were loading, they were counting, never had any issues.
And what was your system to go through, like your checklist of things before you actually pulled off with the bread or the work?
My checklist before I drove off started before I left. It started with great rest. It started with making sure all of the IDs, making sure all of the tags were straight, making sure one of the number one things is making sure those lights over that license plate were good. Because you drive cross country and you're not stopping, you're gonna drive at night. One of the biggest things that they want to pull you over for is those lights, those two little lights that go on the side or above the license plate. They could pull you over. You weren't driving erratic, everything checked out. But because of that, and it's happened to me before, they can. So it started with great rest. It started with good food in my stomach. Not to be gross or crass, but doing a number two, right? Because I didn't want to take number twos in the gas stations, right? Or didn't want to stop at any hotels. But you're watching people as they're loading up the work before it goes into the car. Then you're watching them from the other side as they're doing it. You're also seeing what type of cleaning materials are they taking. If they've got the ammonia or the bleach, is it too loud? You can't walk inside of a limo and it smell like ammonia and bleach. They automatically know that you didn't wash the car down. So you got to use certain things, and you're also checking the spot. You checking it, is it like in different vehicles, the actuators, the arms that open up, that the actuator actuates it to open up and the arms push it from wherever it's going. You're making sure that these aren't making any noise, that they're lubed up. The sequence of events that you need to open up the spot, that the spot isn't staying open too long, just in case you got to open it, you got to close it. You're making sure that on that limousine, that gap is filled. You feeling around, you going in between the seats because you learn. Like it's Monday, people trying to go to Magic City, they leave $5,000 in the champagne bucket. You know what I mean? So you going through the car, checking it. You taking little napkins and folding it in the in the cups, because that's what limousines do. Everything has to fit what a limousine looks like. The smell has to be right. The carpet has to be right. The little treats that you have in the car have to be right. If it's a limousine, they're gonna have some waters or something else in the car. Everything from the trunk, your tire needs to be in the same place, because the police are always looking at the spare tire to see if there's any work in there. So everything, and you also checking, making sure you got your insurance, making sure you got your registration, making sure you got your license, practicing where you going, how you going, who you going to see, all of these things. You have to anticipate the questions that law enforcement will ask you.
So what were some of the sequences to actuate the stash, opening and closing of the stash, opening the stash?
The sequence for opening up the stash, I'll give a couple because it might be some cars out there. You could be in park or you could be in drive, but you had to roll down the window for the back, the shade that goes in the limo. You had to roll it down. Then you had to put the defroster on. Then you could start it and then you could start driving, but you couldn't open it without with the car driving. And then what would happen is the back seat would go and it'd open. And then you'd have to do another sequence because it's a aircraft grade aluminum, so it's lighter, right? And so the compressors compress all of the air out because the dog smells the air, the molecules of air from the cocaine, or the money that was near the cocaine that is cocaine on the money. So the compartments are sealed shut, right? And so now just because you can get to them doesn't mean that you can open them. So now you got to hit another button for it to
decompress.
And now it decompresses. Now, but you can't rush it. Now when it decompresses, then you can open up the tanks and get the work out. But if I'm looking at the car, I know what to look for. Because you got to think, if you got 100 kilos, 2.2 pounds per kilo, right? That's an extra 220 pounds. If you really looked at the car, I know that the car is off a little bit on the left because that's where the work is, right? The driver's on that side and there's that side. And if you look at limos, most limos that are J with the cross right here, J-style limos, if the people on this side, that's the side of the lean-to slightly. So you're looking at that like, is it too much? Is it too off? You're looking at champagne buckets. You're looking at the carpet. A crumb could be when they took it out the bag, that crumb hit the ground and they put it in the spots. But that crumb, I've actually tasted crumbs and my tongue started getting numb because it was cocaine. Now we got to start the whole process of, well, fuck everybody else. We cleaning this whole car. We taking these mats out the whole 9 yards because now my life and this money and this work is in danger. So it's been times where we had to redo the whole cars, clean the whole cars because this was my life. This was my job. You got one job. Do your job well.
So you were very thorough in the preparation for hitting the road, whether it was with the money or with the material. But still, one day you were stopped and you did get caught. Initially, you were stopped and you were caught with a little under $600,000, $586,000 to be exact. What happened there? How did that happen?
The first time I was caught with $586,000 outside of St. Louis, Missouri and Fenton, Missouri, what happened then was a complete cluster. Everything was off. The people bringing the money from start in St. Louis was off. I left out too early from Atlanta. That was off. I didn't prepare myself like I usually did. And they were taking too long bringing the money instead of having all the money set up, ran through all of the money counted. And
by the time you arrived.
Yeah.
So normally by the time you arrived, the money would have all been counted. It would have all been packed away.
Yeah.
And it was ready to be loaded.
Ready to be loaded.
So when you got there on this particular pickup, none of that was in place.
No.
So you had to sit and wait for that.
Yeah, I had to sit and wait, but more importantly, I had to sit and wait and not sleep because I had left out at the wrong time. When you're driving cross country, you never want to do 2 nights. You want to do, your body can maybe make it through 1 full night going nonstop. But if you do
you're driving overnight.
Yeah, when you're driving cross country, like say you start out at midnight, your body can take that, maybe that midnight and that next day. But when you start going into the night, your body is, no matter how many NODOs, whatever, your body is crashing. And so I was ready, thinking that ready for hours, and I wasn't sleeping. So by the time I got on the road, it was too late and I pulled over at a Hampton Inn. And 3 hours later, I was leaving. I saw the police car, St. Louis County police car. And I'm like, it's just the county police cars. Because this wasn't the first time I got stopped. I've been stopped 4 other times, loaded. And every time I got away, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Alabama, and New Mexico, from state troopers to local yokels to investigators, everything. So I thought I was invincible. Did
any of those previous stops give you any indication that these people had stopped you knowing that you were part of BMF?
No. Mm-mm.
So these were, as far as you could tell, just random stops.
Yeah, these stops that I had the other 4 times, New Mexico, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. Yeah, Fort Smith, Arkansas. All of those other stops were super random profiling stops, right? And dogs, everything, passed with flying colors, state troopers, regular, it didn't matter. But this one was different. When the police are nervous, if you ever get pulled over and the police hands are shaking when they're asking for your ID, you know something is wrong. I knew it. It wasn't the other ones, cool as a cucumber, it's showtime, but this one, it wasn't right. And instantly, it doesn't work like this. Usually, when they stop you, it takes time for the rest of them to get there. No, it was that St. Louis County police officer stopped me, then conversion vans, minivans, pickup trucks, everything were there immediately on the scene. And that's when I knew it was going down. And I was in the black limo at that time. I was in a black limo from, it wasn't our limo. We got this limo from some other people. And people that in the know, if you know, you know. But we got this limo, the black limo, from some other people, allegedly, who I won't mention. But if you know, you know. I think the limo was bad. I think
Bad in what way?
I think the limo was super hot because that limo had flipped over before and had sat in St. Louis and it was worked on. And if you had to replace quarter panels, if you're a body technician, I own a body shop, and you've got to cut out that side, you're going to see the tanks. If you cut through, only way you're going to see the tanks. If you cut through that side panel, you're going to see the tanks. You ain't going to know what you're looking at, but you're going to know what you're looking at, right? So that limo had been worked on. We hadn't worked that limo. I believe that limo was hot. I believe that all of that running around that day led to that morning of me getting pulled over. I believe that when I was leaving, they were seeing where I was going. And when I didn't meet anybody at that hotel, and when I was getting ready to come out of St. Louis, that's when they jumped on me.
Did you have any, well, what happened as a result of that stop? First of all, the $586,000.
What happened with the $586,000 stop was almost nothing. People don't know when there's money or when they're watching you, they'll sit on you. They've got the liberty and the luxury to sit on you. They catch you with the money. They have, for money laundering to exist, there has to be some type of illegal and illicit activity connected with the money, right? So when they catch you with money, they'll let you go that day because all you're going to do is go do some other stupid shit, right? To get caught. Now they're going to put that, whatever you got caught with or whatever those people you're dealing with that money. And now we've got America's greatest conspiracy.
So you were arrested.
Yes.
And how long did they hold you before they released you?
They didn't hold me for 24 hours.
And was there bail involved?
I think it was a stupid like $1,000 bond.
Okay.
Where anybody could make it.
Okay. So it was kind of like catch and release.
Oh.
Okay.
In hindsight, 2020, of course it was.
Right.
Catch and release.
Right. Okay, so they let you go, and about 26. When did that happen? What was the date of that occurrence when you initially caught that?
When I initially got caught with $586,000.
That was March 16th.
It was March 16th, 2004. I want to say it was a weekday, and
then 26 days later on Easter Sunday,
mm-hmm.
you get stopped in a mobile home.
Mm-hmm.
How did that come about?
Well, first, 26 days after I got caught with $586,000, I got caught with allegedly 103 kilos of cocaine. When I say allegedly, it's not that I got caught with the cocaine. It was the number, right? It wasn't 103 in there. Shout out to law enforcement. Y'all do what y'all do. I'm just saying, that RV didn't start out with 103 kilos of cocaine. I'm just saying, the statute of limitations is up for police officers and for me too. I understand. But actually, in between that time, I had already made one round trip to California already.
In that RV?
In that same RV. I was 112 miles away, not that I was counting, from St. Louis, Missouri. I was in Phelps County, which is Rollo, Missouri. So this was going to be my second round trip after I had sat for a while. And then I got back on the road. I had already went to California, came back, got paid, went back there, and was 112 miles away from my destination in St. Louis when I got busted.
And so what brought that on, that stop, what initiated that stop?
What brought the stop on, my belief, is a police officer who was, I think, a big hunter. People don't know a lot of these officers. Some of them, they're out for the hunt. They want to catch that bag. Like I was doing personal records, they were doing personal records too. The same police officer had caught Britney Spears' driver with like 1,500 pounds of weed at one time. Not Britney Spears, in the vehicle. And Scott Rosenblum, shout out to Rosenblum, Schwartz, and Glass in St. Louis, Missouri, the best super lawyer in the whole land there. Unbeknownst to me, this same officer had been kicked out of St. Louis County Police Department, and he was part of the bust that got kicked out of court for improper search and seizure. So the same cop that stopped me was a pretty aggressive police officer who used to allegedly beat his ex-wife and kicked out of St. Louis County. Did I say that? Mm-hmm. And had got beat by my same lawyer, Scott Rosenblum, super attorney out of St. Louis, Missouri. If you need him, call him. So that's what happened. I believe that officer had already busted a RV tour bus, and he just wanted to profile me, and the rest is history.
So how did that go? The actual stop. He had to have some sort of premise. Mm-hmm. So what was it that he said was he didn't say I was profiling you?
No. Mm-mm. The actual stop, he said it was illegal lane change, and he pulled me over for that. He asked me to step out the limo. I stepped out the limo. He tried to play the good cop role, like, hey, I know people like to party. He's looking at my ID, and when I pass him my ID, he's looking at my hand to see if it's shaking. He's trying to look at my neck for the cardioid or whatever it is, vein, but I've got a sweater on, so there's no way he could see that, even though he said that in court or in the reports. And he's trying to profile me and be the good cop and say, hey, man, do you party? I was like, what do you mean party? He's like, do you party? I was like, no, sir, I don't. Whatever that is, I don't do that. So he was making references to cocaine and just a super, I want to search your vehicle. And he asked me, and I said, no, sir. I said, this is my home. This is my RV that I'm renting. And so he brought Jerry. Jerry was the dog. Jerry was the canine that came, and Jerry was the dog. Jerry was not certified. Jerry got certified after my bust. Mm. Basically, they have the bark and sit. when they walk the dog, the handler walks the dog around whatever vehicle or whatever it is. If they bark and sit, that means there's something illegal and there's some drugs. Well, Jerry did that, but Jerry was more of a mascot, kind of like how that Dalmatian, that black and white polka dot Dalmatian that's at the fire station, they don't do anything with the fire, right? That's what Jerry was. Actually, Jerry's history, I know a little bit about his lineage because we researched it, right? Mm-hmm. Jerry was the officer's dog in Afghanistan. So when this person who was serving in Afghanistan, shout out to our military, came back, they started working for the police department. Jerry was this gentleman's dog. So Jerry would ride with his master, but Jerry wasn't certified. Jerry was not a certified dog sniffing dog, even though he barked.
Drug sniffing dog.
Exactly, drug sniffing dog. So Jerry did his thing, and there's a saying in the trafficking world: the dog has never met a car that they didn't like.
Right.
They always bark. No matter if the whole car was drenched in bleach and there was never an iota of drugs in it, the dog always barks. That gives them the reason to search the vehicle.
Yeah, some real bullshit. Yeah. You mentioned hunters, the big game hunters. Tell us about the big game hunters out there on the road.
The big game hunters are the officers. Most of them Republicans. Most of them served in the military. I know the whole profile on them. Most of them have more than 5 guns in their houses. Most of them have a home. They have at least 1 dog, a wife. If they're older, they're divorced and they're on their second wife. They have a 2-car garage. And as much as I was a adrenaline junkie to get that traffic allegedly those drugs, they were hunting me. And the good ones were hunting just for the bust. The other ones were people, they glorified as trafficking life. You make all of this money. But when you're out there on the road, some of them, not all of them, God bless them. I believe a lot of them are good people. They're out to kidnap you, kill you, and rob you. That's one type of hunter, right? The other ones, they are so psyched up that they want to make that bust. They, just like me, I wanted a personal record for how much I could take out to wherever and bring it back. They wanted the same thing. So in their circle, they're that like big hunter, and I was hunted. I was like that albino rhino or that gorilla. They wanted the paw, or they wanted that tiger. So yeah, they're definitely big game hunters.
Did you ever carry a weapon?
No. I never carried a weapon when I trafficked. If you got to carry a weapon, there's a problem. Plus, if you get caught with anything, that gun adds 5 years, right? That's possession of a firearm and the commission of a crime for you people that know your law, right? No, you never carry a gun. Like, who carries a gun when you are a regular person? When you're on that road, you're just a regular citizen enjoying an open land. You don't need to have a gun. If you need to have a gun with a drug deal, you don't need to do the drug deal.
Facts. So knowing that these big game hunters were out there, people who would pull you over under the auspices of checking you and finding anything, arresting you, but would actually be out to kill you.
Absolutely.
Hide your body and take the drugs or the money. Did you ever get scared thinking about that?
Did I ever get scared when I was out there on the road with millions of dollars or hundreds of kilos of cocaine? I hated the word scared because you can have a little bit of scaredness, I guess, but I hated when anybody ever asked me that question because you can't do this every day and be scared. Like, I lived for it. I loved it. The better question should be, why did you like being stopped? I got to the point where I believed that I was so fucking invincible that I done got away 4 times loaded. 100 keys in a car, dog, 2 state troopers. I'm back on the road. And I done gave them my card, told them if they're in Atlanta, come see me. I was so far gone that I believed that That's that illusion of opportunity that I was invincible, that I couldn't get stopped. I loved it. I loved sitting in that chair. I loved the adrenaline rush. I loved pushing myself to see how far I could drive before I literally almost passed out. I loved that I was loved. When you're a driver, you have the few people in the world that know what you're doing. There's nothing you can't ask them for. Right now, if I was on the road and Meech was out there, I'd be like, hey man, I want a lion. And Meech would be like, I don't use the N-word. He'd be like, my nigga, give me a minute, I'll get you a lion. When you on the road with people's millions of dollars, they don't give a care. They're gonna tell you whatever and they're gonna do whatever. I remember one time I said, man, I want some crab fried rice. I said, you know what? This city I ain't used to being in. You got any girls there? They was like, what you want? Light skin or dark skin? It didn't matter when you were out on that road, if it was 2 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, whatever, they would answer that call. I loved being out there. I loved the adrenaline rush. I loved passing the police. I loved it all. I loved being stopped and getting away. I ain't loved getting busted. I loved getting away. I loved the game. I loved the game that they played, that I was playing back and forth with them. Just the whole, like, for me, I'm in a euphoric place when my life is on the line. When I'm going 140, 150, when the road is turning into like one road and I got this car and I'm just going out, just the fearlessness. That was my drug. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't taste, I don't sample any of that, but I love the life. That was my drug of choice. When I say I loved it, and this is sad, I loved it more than my family. I loved it more than I did myself. I said I wanted to do other things with my life, but that right there, nothing could beat it. It was my everything. I loved it. I wanted it. I was married to it. I never wanted to get divorced from it. After getting stopped, the insanity part and the sick part is if you get stopped one time, most sane people quit. 2 times, they quit. 3 times, they quit. 4 times, they quit. You get caught. Actually, when you go to jail, they quit. You get caught. You get pulled over 6 times and you get caught. They quit. I was too stupid to stop. And when I got busted and I was on house incarceration, where my family had to put up their house and we had to put up $250,000, I still said the dumbest thing I could say in my life. I said, man, they're going to let me out on house arrest on curfew. I got 8 hours. If you need me to make a run, I'll do it. I was that sick and that far out there that I didn't care about anything.
Would you do it again?
I would not do it again. But I would not go out there again under no circumstances. And I've had to rehearse that to myself. I had to ingrain in myself when I was sitting in them shitholes all around this country that under no circumstances, I said, if I was under the bridge with my son, I would be okay. But now, when my cousin asked me, when I got out of jail, when I got out on bond, she asked me that, I should have lied. I should have said, no, I wouldn't do it again. I was ready to do it again the day I got out, the minute I got out. Before I got out, I was ready to do it. But I told the truth. I should have lied because my family had this big thing. I got out, we go to Morton's, we come back to the house. It was like a repast, like somebody died and they trying to celebrate. And my cousin Tiffany asked me, she said, would you do it again? I said, yeah, I'd do it again.
And this is after you got bailed out
after
for the
I got
103.
bailed out. Yeah, afterwards. And I thought she was stupid for asking me that question. What kind of question is that to ask me? Would I do it again? Of course I'd do it again. I'd do it right now. If the money was right, but no, I got too much. The truth, I know it's a target on my back. I put the target there. I did a book. I did a documentary. I got a second documentary. These are my customers. I got judges, I got lawyers, I got prosecutors, ADAs, DEA agent, task force agent, lieutenants, sergeants, everything. Bureau of Prisons people. I'm just a car man now. I just repair cars. I don't do none of that stuff, but back then, that's all I wanted to do.
So why keep doing it after you made 100,000 or $1 million?
Can I backtrack real quick? When people shoot at me, not with a gun, but when people shoot at me and they like, hey man, I seen something that looked good. I play stupid. I be like, yeah. They be like, yeah, man, the number good. I be like, I don't know nothing about nothing. I don't know. Because what they really asking me is, they really saying they want somebody to have sex with my wife. Because if I get 10 years, I got to divorce my wife, right? I get 10 years, I got to cast my kid to the side because all I'm going to be is a phone daddy. I'm going to just be the dude on the phone or on some video that they see. I'm going to give up my 5-bedroom, 3-bath house. I'm going to give up my business that I worked for, that I've sacrificed going 8 checks without cashing them because I was on my knuckles. Everything I've worked for the whole life. And I'm allowing somebody else to bury my mother. That's what you really ask me when you ask me, hey, look, you trying to get down this, that. You saying you want to have somebody else have sex with my wife. You want to have somebody else live in my house. You want somebody else to have my business. You want my children to never know me, to really kill my kids. That's what you really asking me to do. You asking me to kill my mother because they ain't gonna let me out for the funeral. My father died May 4th, 2018. I was there for his last breath, right? I'm not getting no furlough. Well, so when somebody asks me, would I do it again? And they're like, hey, or not when I do it again, when they offer me the illusion of opportunity, that's what they really saying to me. They really trying to slowly kill me and kill my family.
How many drivers were there?
I'll talk about our side. It was multiple drivers. It was 2 mainstay drivers on our side. And then it was a 3rd driver that had got popped. And then a couple people did a couple runs, but it was only really 2. It was another driver and myself.
Did any other drivers compromise at any point?
Not on our side. On Meech's side, and that's all I'll talk about, our crew stood strong. Excuse me. Our crew stood strong. Our drivers were good when I was there. Before and after, I don't know about. But when I was there, all of our drivers were true and tried.
Who was the best driver?
The best driver, as much as I would want to say it was me, is a legendary dude named Salsa. He is probably the best driver in the world. And I know people, it's only in this particular business, it's only a few people in the world that know about who a driver is, right? Because you got to be like a spy. But the best driver really is the one that never got caught, right? That's the best driver, right? But you don't know how good you are as a driver until you get stopped, right? And Salsa, to me, he's the best driver in the rudest way. When the police stop him, he goes off. He at them instantly. It ain't no Mr. Nice Guy. Here's my stuff. Why you pull me over? Instantly off the muscle. He dictates and he drives. I've never seen one like him. As much as I want to say is me, and I think at that time in my life, I thought I was the best of the best, but being a more mature man and looking at it for what it was, I'll say, yeah. I'd probably be the second best driver in the world.
Shout out to the homie Salsa.
Yeah.
Where were you in November 2003 when Diddy's former security, Anthony Wolf Jones, and his friend Lamont Riz Gertie, may they rest in peace, were killed outside of Club Chaos in Atlanta's Buckhead area?
I was in my house in November of 2003, asleep with my family, when the gentleman and his friend were unfortunately killed.
Wolf must have heard that his ex was up at the spot with Meech and him because he was at Magic City standing next to me and T.I. when he just shot out of the door. And then a couple hours later, I'm at the diner and I hear on the TV 2 bodies in Buckhead. I don't know what's going on. I'm thinking that has nothing to do with nobody I know. And I go in and I go lay down at Club Kitchen. And then I hear that, it was him and his guy that had died, and that it all came from, him hearing about the lady being up at the spot with the guys, and then they get up there and, he's irate, he mushes her, Meech intervenes, he steps in, and then, there's a verbal and then there's a physical kind of altercation. Begged him to calm down, begged Wolf to calm down, and Wolf, he comes back, he gets ejected from the club, and then he get outside and he says some words, and then all of a sudden gunfire erupts. 50 rounds fired off in Buckhead, unheard of. And then, Meech is hit in the behind. He goes to the hospital, and a short time after he's there, he's arrested and handcuffed to his bed. And it results in Big Meech being charged with a double murder. All right. So Meech sits at the house on house arrest for a few months before, ultimately being let out. And ultimately, no one is convicted for those 2 bodies. Now, during this whole thing, are you worried about what the state of the organization itself is? That level of the executive body being involved in that level of conflict, tumult, and high profile behavior?
During the time that the gentleman Wolf and his friend were killed, allegedly at Club Chaos in Buckhead, as you said, over 50 plus rounds were shot in the heart of the richest zip code in the state of Georgia. I wasn't worried about the state of BMF at that time because, one, I was still thinking that we were invincible. 2, if you know Meech can talk a nun into Islam. Meech sat us all down at different times and said, hey, look, while I'm on house arrest, y'all do what y'all do. Be all you can be, And while they're looking at me, they won't be looking at y'all. So continue the same game plan, continue to keep going harder. And he made house arrest the funnest house arrest I've ever seen any human being on God's planet Earth do house arrest. It was literally, they asked him, at Strokers, can you please not take 30 of the best looking girls here to your house to party? Like, they would send recruits out to Strokers because they would take the strip club to the house. And it was a frenzy beyond movie lore. It was like you were just in a foreign country and it was literally like its own sovereign ground. You would never thought somebody was facing capital murder, double capital murder, because it was the biggest party in Snellville that I think they've ever seen and they ever will see.
So at this point, Meech is separate from Terry, right? And of course, Meech's following is way more pronounced. So there's, big campaign, free Big Meech t-shirts. They want to free Big Meech. He's not in jail. He's actually in this utopian situation in this big ass house that he is in total control of, whatever, but they want to free him, and I think that the understanding or the idea is that this kind of exacerbated the divide between him and Terry, all right, because it raised his profile even more, right? And so now they're starting to, they're really kind of starting to work on trying to bring this organization down. And they're heavy on the phones. Of course, Meech is not on the phones, but Terry is on the phones. And in one of these phone calls, these intercepted phone calls, we have Terry all but threatening to kill his brother on his wiretap if he doesn't, get low and stop drawing so much attention to himself. So, there are other things happening as well. There's, then there's a situation where it's discovered where Jabo discovers that the work that is coming through Terry is being cut. He's pulling, 20 extra joints off of every 100 joints, right? People are complaining about that. He's making a extra 20 off of every joint, every 100 joints. Somebody is definitely not getting what they paying for, right? Or what they've been paying for.
But then you find out that Terry was actually taking the bricks, diluting the cocaine, repackaging them up, and basically he would make an extra 20 bricks out of the 100 that he originally had.
Yeah, we didn't catch on to that, because I was a firm believer in just getting it how I get it, fleece it just like that. Don't take nothing out. I ain't like that shit. I never did like doing shit like that. So, once our situations made it to the other side of the world, and I started getting all these fucking calls, and I'm knowing that I'm not putting no cut on it. I ain't doing none of that shit. Like, what the fuck is y'all talking about? Like, bro, this shit should be raw. I'm like, man, no, it's losing. The shit, people complaining, it's doing this, it's doing that. So I was like, damn, I'm having to go talk to bro. I was like, man, what, we got a problem. Like, motherfuckers saying our shit ain't right, and I know we getting this shit. It's supposed to be what it's supposed to be, but it wasn't that. So that's how we kind of found out.
So, shipments are being screwed up. How is this being handled internally, these screwed up shipments?
During this time in 03 going into 04, when Meech was on house arrest in a 6,000 plus square foot house, right, where it was the club every night, right, where all of the drugs and all of the liquor and all of the pills and all of the weed could be consumed. And it was more popping than Magic City, Strokers, and the Gentleman's Club put together. I never understood the concept. If you're getting thousands of chickens, thousands of kilos of cocaine a month, why would you or any human being step on it, rewrap it, and get an extra 20 out of 100? I'll speak to what people, when they got Meech's work, would say. They loved Meech's work because as it sat in that mule, that submarine, that truck, that diesel, whatever it was, when it went from Colombia or Sinaloa, Mexico, however it got here, bruised, battered, and scarred with money taped to it or whatever, that's how Meech gave it to you. So people preferred Meech's work compared to whoever. I don't take sides. But people wanted Meech's work because it was always A1. It was never stepped on. If you seen a cut in the work, it was because somebody had tested it to make sure it had that purity. That was it. No questions, no nothing, Meech never in my lifetime got an extra 2, an extra 10, an extra 200. As he got it from the cartel, he gave it to you. And that's why the lore of Meech was so great with everybody, because he took a really quality control business approach to this drug business. He had honor in it, and he gave it to you as you got it. And most people weren't used to seeing a brown face if you bought 50 kilos of cocaine, that he gave you a push, a front for 50, but you had to come back in the day with the other 50. Speed. Speed, speed, speed. They can't catch what's not there.
That's right.
That was the motto.
Yeah. So the situation with Wolf and Riz being killed was undoubtedly a turning point. Now, all the other activity that was taking place, billboards and the parties and the all the other high-profile behavior, couple of smaller, low-key kind of events, that involve violence, whatever. Those were contributing to drawing that attention, that undue attention. But that shooting really did it was a turning point. You agree?
I agree that the shooting in Buckhead for the gentleman, Wolf, and his friend being killed was a definitely turning point for law enforcement to ramp up their investigations and to start pushing all of the people that they had that would make proffers for the government. It definitely was a turning point. It was probably one of the biggest. A lot of people don't know that in this drug selling business, you can sell a lot of drugs, but when you become a public menace, that is one of the biggest keys for law enforcement to come after you, because they say drugs are a victimless crime. It's not a violent crime. But once you step over that threshold of violence, when you become that public menace and you become bigger than the law, that's when, in the federal government, when you get sentenced, is the United States of America, in all caps, all 300 plus million of the citizens against little old you. So that's what changes when those things happen.
So on June 8th, 2005, an unknown signed a confidential source agreement and described his role in BMF, naming Demetrius Flannery as the source of the cocaine. The shooting, that particular event, and these events and a number of others formed the backbone of the government's case. And during the trial, the government's witness, star witness, was William Doc Marshall. Testimony given during various trials say the Flannery organization operated as follows. BMF operated 5 stash houses in the Atlanta area. Approximately every 10 days, vehicles would arrive with 100 to 150 kilos of cocaine packed in secret compartments. Workers at the stash houses were paid to unload the drugs and store them. Customers who ordered would call in and say they had their vehicle ready, meaning a transportation vehicle to put the narcotics in. Depending on the size of their order, they were directed to a particular stash house where they would pull in, go inside, hand over money in $5,000 bundles. The cocaine was usually sold at $20,000 per kilogram. The same vehicles would then be filled with cash, the proceeds from the drug sales, to be sent back to the Mexican sources of supply. Workers inside the stash houses had certain duties, such as counting bulk amounts of cash, usually in the millions. Other people were packaging the cocaine for customers. BMF also received drugs through large containers at the airport containing 100 to 150 kilograms of cocaine, which they picked up and delivered to stash houses. So, while this is all becoming public record, it is becoming public record largely through Doc Marshall. Doc Marshall is reputed to be the bookkeeper, and he came into the light after someone attempted to rob a spot of his, and he killed that intruder. And the place was cleaned up before the police were called, except for what some people might say, a whole kilo of cocaine that was overlooked. But when you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of kilos, overlooking a kilo is, it's negligible. It's plausible. Not in Not in my book, but in some people's books, it's plausible. So now they have a ledger detailing all of these transactions that seem to be attributed to illicit activity. All right. And they have Doc Marshall dead to rights. Do you remember Doc? What was your interaction, if any, with Doc?
Doc Marshall. Do I remember Doc? Yes, I do. I have a funny story, America, about Mr. Doc Marshall. In Wayne County Jail, Mr. Marshall, if that's his name that he goes by, Mr. Marshall and I were on the rock. If you ever been to Wayne County Jail, you know we were on the rock together for 2 weeks. We go to court. Me and him been riding together, working out, doing push-ups, sit-ups, everything. We kicking it. We telling stories about the streets, everything. Well, when we come back to court, let me give you a little lesson here. There's something called the separatees. Separatees means that you and this person are on the same case, and usually that other person may be snitching on you or vice versa. And so when I got back from court, and we had been together for 2 weeks, the marshals and the bailiffs were like, oh, y'all two can't be together. I said, can't be together? I knew what it was then. Doc Marshall had went to court and told on everybody, and he was their star witness. I didn't know at the time because I was in prison. They hadn't released who the informants were. I found out real quick, and I learned a big lesson that day. I'll say God bless him. God bless America, and God bless him. I'll add something. This dude was such, how do I want to say this? When we were in the county jail together, this dude acted like everything was good. He's like, hey man, come to my club. Had my wife at the time, ex-wife that is, go to the club, champagne, everything. I guess he was paying for it. He was like, okay, I'm going to bang your head when we get to court. I'm going to let your wife party for a little while, but it's an exchange for, God bless him, man. The man told me, he said, he didn't even know, he hadn't used his real name in so many years. When they would call him, he wouldn't even know who they were calling. His government name that his mom and daddy gave him, because he had used so many aliases and had been so scandalous and such a complete
sociopath.
You said it right. That he didn't even recognize his own name. He hadn't used his own ID in over 2 decades.
So had you ever heard that prior to the situation involving the family, that Doc had already been an informant? He had already been a confidential informant?
No. Mm-mm. I really didn't have any dealings with him on the streets, but on a couple occasions. Yeah. I remember him seeing him out. I remember he was from New York. I remember he was loud. I remember he had the cars, but I never bought a car from him, anything. Yeah,
That was my next question.
Yeah.
So he did the car thing. That was kind of his thing. He got people cars. And so when any of the cars that you were driving, did he provide any of those cars that were moved, that were being used for transportation?
He never provided. Doc Martin never provided any cars.
Marshall.
Doc Marshall, yeah. I was talking about the shoes, Doc Martens.
Good shoes.
Doc Marshall never provided any cars that I drove for business, any cars that I drove for personal, any cars that I knowingly got in or anything. Yeah, I had acquaintance and a distance from him.
Okay.
But I did hear he had the cars, and I did hear that they picked up a bunch of the cars. I did hear that he was getting people's cars, jacking off the money, never paying a note. The cars were getting repoed. The cars were sitting at the impound under investigation after people had given him money. He had a good business with the cars, but he was jacking off the money like he was in the streets, and cars were getting repoed. Allegedly.
Right. Did you know anything about the containers that were coming into the airport?
No, I had nothing to do with any containers.
Were you even aware of that being, as far as you knew, was there any other route by which the material was coming in?
I didn't know of any other conduits or transportation other than driving it from point A to B. I didn't know about the containers at that time. Never.
You found out about that after the fact?
I heard about the containers years later, but I didn't have anything to do with that. Mm-hmm. No knowledge of it either.
So Meech really operated with under the old adage, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing.
1,000,000%. Yeah. And he did that very well.
Yes, he did.
He did that very well.
He compartmentalized very well.
And he had a bunch of cars that I didn't even know about. He had cars and houses and jewelry that I didn't know about. And I knew about a lot. I was the trusted one with the money and the work. Let me tell you a funny story about Meech that people don't know. I'm a little off subject here. I just get in from Georgia or St. Louis, one of them. And I'm like, hey, let me borrow your car. I need to go to the airport. And he told me no. I couldn't fathom how I could be trusted with thousands of kilos of cocaine and $100+ million, but I can't borrow your car to go to the airport? He was like, no. It wasn't until I went to prison that I understand why he didn't let me use his car. He trusted me with everything, but his car was his car. He knew it wasn't me. The person that was gonna drop me off at the airport was probably gonna scrape one of his $12,000, $15,000 set of wheels. He was gonna be mad. The wheel is a custom-made wheel that is gonna take 8 weeks to make, and now he's gotta ride around with a scraped wheel. That person is gonna hit the Ferrari, and now it's gonna take him 2 months to get into the shop that's gonna do it right, and he's gonna have a hit. If a Ferrari is in any accident, the Ferrari is dead. Nobody wants it, it's trash. So I understood it later, but that was probably the only time I ever got mad at Meech. I was like, he was like, call a cab. I don't even know the address to this house. How am I gonna call a cab? But I understood it after I got to prison, because people don't treat your stuff because they think, oh, you got 3 Ferraris, you got 30, 40 cars. You don't care about this, but that was his. Right. And I respect it and I understand it now. Right. But yeah,
he was very much a very beneficent person. He'd give you pretty much any goddamn thing. That's the only instance I've ever heard of anybody saying he didn't comply with whatever request that they made.
And it wasn't me. It was the person who was going to drop me off. That was the only other person at the house that was going to leave. Another story about Meech. You have never seen a calmer individual than Meech.
No doubt.
This is when I first started driving the limo cross country with the work in it. And I checked the cars when I was leaving and going, but going to the car wash, I didn't check the car. So I go to get an oil change because we driving, we drive every 3,000 miles, almost every trip, we changing the oil. I go to the car wash, I said, I'm gonna get an oil change. The guy's like, you want an oil change? He takes it. He's like, you want the car wash? I was like, I want inside and out. I want it to look good. Because you don't want all of that dust from the desert on the car. Right. And you in the city, it looks off. Yeah. And you got Georgia plates, so it looks super crazy, right? So I'm at the car wash. I'm watching the car go on the conveyor belt. I'm chilling. I'm thinking about what time I need to leave, where I saw the police at, Flagstaff, Arizona, all of this stuff. Little short Latino man is cleaning the inside. And then this dude, he got on some shorts. He got on shorts, he's a little bitty man. He say, sir, I need to see you. I'm like, oh, okay. He go over to the car. I said, well, what you need to see me? He said, come in. So I go in the car. He pull out of the champagne bucket $5,000. I look at that $5,000. I look at him. I'm like, oh my gosh, one of my customers must have left it. He said, it's yours? I said, it's one of my customers. So I get the money, I put it in my pocket. Now I'm waiting. I don't know if it's a trap or whatever. So I'm waiting. So I'm sitting there. I call Meech. I say, hey man, they left $5 in the demo. He said, what? I said, yeah. Excuse my language, I don't use N-word. He said, what you tip that nigga? I said, I gave him 20. He said, man, get that nigga $100. So I go get a dude $100 and I'm ready to leave. This dude come over with these tight little shorts on. He's like, sir. I'm like, oh, be cool. Don't act up. I'm like, yes. He's like, do you still want the oil change? I was like, no, I don't need the oil change. So I ride around LA for about 3 hours. I'm just going every different direction. I know how to get back home, but I got to ride around because I don't know if it's a tail. Guess what Meech say when we get back to the house? He said, where the $5,000 at? I was like, here, man. He's like, oh, this the church's money. He put it in his pocket. He said, you'll learn a lesson. I'm looking, this dude, we could, for $5,000, he is so cool, but that's experience.
Right.
That's having been through so many things, seen so many things. You don't panic. He ain't panicked. He was super cool. He took the $5,000, put it in his pocket as church's money.
What would have been the reason, the cause for panic? Most people watching this are going to be, well, that's cause for elation. Find $5,000 you weren't looking for. What would be the cause for panic? The
cause for panic would be that you've got a limo with Georgia plates in California. Some man done found $5,000 that you know is telling everybody at that car wash that he found $5,000 that's making you hot as a firecracker. But it also speaks to that Latino man that I'm sure he didn't make $10 an hour. He was just a super honorable dude. Because most people, that might have been his life savings. He could have went back to his country.
Yeah.
But dude was honorable.
Right then and there.
Right then and there. Like, they no checking out, no clocking out. He could have left. But dude was honorable.
Baño. Baño.
I never went back to that car wash either.
I bet you didn't. Okay, so we're going to fast forward a bit, right? 2005. All right, you're in jail now.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and you've been given your sentence. Your sentence is 66 months. All right, so you're going in to do your time. This is for the $586,000. This is for the 103 birds.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're going in. That's it. You're done. You make your agreement with the prosecutor and say, I'll take this time. I'm pleading. I'm guilty of this. Boom, boom, boom. That's it. Mm-hmm. That's all. And you go in. Mm-hmm. And then 2005, they start the raids. They start going into, the feds start raiding all the houses. So they raid, a bunch of homes. Terry's on the run. Misha's on the run. They arrest Terry at a gambling party in Missouri. He's got $6 million in cash on him. They chase Meech down to Texas. He's in Dallas, I believe.
Frisco. Mm-hmm.
Frisco. And he gets arrested in the raid. It's uneventful, whatever. A little bit of bread, weed, of course. And 30 members of the family are arrested. There are 42 defendants indicted. The feds claim that BMF is responsible for moving over 2,500 kilograms of cocaine a month throughout the United States. How did you feel when you heard that Meech and Terry were arrested?
When Meech and Terry got arrested, and T got arrested in 2005, I want to say it was October, it really threw me off. It was like, I thought it could kind of never happen because we had been rolling so long. And when I got busted with the money and the work, the only person on my case was me. So it started and stopped with me, and everybody else was doing their thing. The show was still going on. I was in shock that they got popped, and I couldn't believe that it was real. Part of my mind knew that it could happen, right? But I just couldn't believe that it was all crumbling. It was October of 2005.
Yeah, it is. You're quoted as saying, "I really thought BMF would never end."
Yeah, I was foolish enough to believe that.
Okay, so now it's 2007. You're 35. You're sitting in prison. Terry and Meech, they don't cooperate. They're both facing life in prison. The DEA went after Meech and Terry's dad, went after Pops for money laundering, for money that he had taken to fix different things in the house and so forth, which a lot of people didn't know anything about that could happen. You spending illicit money, you're essentially laundering money.
Yeah,
you're
it's part of a
taking
conspiracy.
illegitimate money and making legitimate purchases with it. Didn't matter that you didn't participate in the activity that garnered that money. You're now incorporated into the conspiracy to defraud the frauds. Defraud the government.
That's the law.
Right.
People don't know that. That's the
Right.
law. You are part of that conspiracy now.
That's right. That's right. So all those girls who've been taking money for drug dealers all this time, the only girl I ever heard of actually getting arrested for taking money from drug dealers is Chrissy. When they grabbed my man Los back in the days. Welcome home, Los. The Atlanta house was in Pop's name. That trapped him up. They also went after Meech's sister and his nephew. And now this trial is about to start. So Meech and Terry asked to speak to each other for the first time, and they spoke. They hadn't spoken in a couple of years. Ultimately, they pleaded to running a continual criminal enterprise, or continuing criminal enterprise. Now, I remember shortly after all of this, Meech called me and we were talking, and he said when he initially was brought in to talk to them about what kind of a plea agreement they could get, the agreement was for 20 years. And then he said, he had to convince Terry to do this because Terry was talking about going to trial. Meech had also shared with me that they had 1,100 hours of Terry on the phone talking about illicit activity. And some of the people he was talking to on those phone calls had cooperated and corroborated what it was that those conversations were actually about, as undisguised as those conversations were. I've heard some of them. It's pretty straightforward. They said everything but, yo, you got the keys, I got the money for the drugs. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is real. So Meech convinces Terry to go with this plea agreement. Okay. Meech said when he gets to the table and it's time to sign this agreement, he looks at the paper and it says 30 years. And he pushed himself away from the table like they expected him to. Like, what? What the fuck? And he said they opened the door and said, we have a jury convened down the hall. If you're ready to go to trial, we're ready right now. But we have someone who's willing to testify that you purchased 500 kilos of cocaine from them. So, it was a pressure play, power play. That the sister that was actually the head prosecutor for that thing, she's now the big boss. Federal
Dawn
attorney's office.
Eisen.
Yes. Shout out to Dawn Eisen.
Shout
Well
out to
played.
Yeah, Spellman sister too.
Well played, sister. And it is a game. Meech and Terry, they plead guilty. Here it is, 2008. You're 36. In September 2008, Terry and Meech are sentenced to 30 years in prison for running a nationwide cocaine trafficking ring, which lasted from 2000 to 2005. How did you feel when you heard that Meech and Terry had taken this 30-year plea?
How did I feel when Meech and Terry took that 30-year plea? It's going to sound crazy, but I was like, they didn't get life. Life in the feds ain't, 20, 30 years. Life in the feds on your paperwork says deceased. Something in federal prison when you go to unit team, on your paperwork it says deceased. If you got life plus 30, if you died and you came back, you'd have 30 more years. It ain't no such thing as, oh no, life is life in the feds. So in a sense, I was like, man, at least they get to come home, you know. But when everybody got indicted, I didn't think I was indicted. I was like, hey, double jeopardy. They can't charge me for that. That's the ignorance of the law. What you get caught with in one district, unless you get your case locked up where it's all known and unknown crimes in U.S. and U.S. territories, you are open game. If you have possession with the intent to distribute here, you are open game in another district jurisdiction for the conspiracy of that, conspiracy to launder monetary instruments, conspiracy to distribute 5 or more kilos of cocaine. So I felt like I'm glad they didn't get life sentences or something crazy like life plus 30. I thought they could have maybe had better representation, because I think T had fired his lawyer once. I wish they would have. I don't know if it would have changed anything, but I wish they would have. Happy that T is home now. God bless him and his family. Hope that Meech comes home sooner than later. I think he can be a big inspiration to millions of people just like us in the world, and that he can be 10 times more powerful with a different message to people when he gets out than he was when he was one of the biggest drug lords of this century.
I think that's what they're concerned about.
Yeah.
So now you're sitting in prison, and you're doing your time, your 66 months. But then this thing happens, and then they add another 87 months to your sentence. So now you essentially have 153 months, but you only serve 66 months of that sentence. Mm-hmm. How is it that you only serve 66 months of a 153-month sentence?
Well, at first I was sentenced to 60 months in the Eastern District of Missouri. That case was just me. Actually, the truth, I thought I won. I got caught with all this work, all this money. I only got 60 months. But that was in the Eastern District of Missouri, which is St. Louis. 11 months of some really good time in prison. A guy came to me, literally. It was a Cuban-American dude. He said, hey, your name Jabari Hayes? I said, yeah. He had a newspaper. People had newspapers back then. He said, you've been indicted. I said, that ain't me. First thing I did, got back, called my lawyer. Hey, look, man, they said I'm indicted. I'm indicted. My lawyer's like, hey, man, I don't know. Then the next day, he was like, yeah, you've been indicted. I said, that's double jeopardy. Ignorance of the law. It's not double jeopardy. You got interstate trafficking in aid of racketeering, which is kind of like possession with the intent to distribute, right? In the Eastern District of Michigan, the conspiracy of that is 2 completely different crimes. So that's how they're able to take another bite at the apple and still be legal. But you think you know the law, you think you studied law, you think you smart, you got all of the sense, but no, they can do it. That's why I was number 9 on the indictment. The first one of, I think it was like 5 superseding indictments, from Jacob Jujula to T, to Meech, to J-Bo, to everybody. Like, when they got everybody, if you counted money, if you rolled blunts, if you put work in the cars, if you were a driver, even if you never got caught with nothing. Conspiracy, 2 or more people conspire. You don't never have to get caught with 1 penny. You don't ever get caught with 1 crumb. But that's the law. Don't get mad at the police or the prosecutors. Congress makes the laws.
That's right. And that particular law was made for the mob.
Yeah. Yep.
So you ended up doing 5.5 years in 19 days.
Yep.
You experienced, as we discussed, a couple of really pivotal moments where you felt like you were relatively scot-free, and then all of a sudden your situation compounded. And, at the point at which, you've been sitting here for a few years, you're still saying, up until your third year in, you're still saying, yeah, I'm when I touch down, I'm getting busy. Mm-hmm. Why did it take you so long to come to the conclusion that you didn't want to be involved in the life again?
It took me so long to say and mean it to myself that I wouldn't go back out there and do it again. It took me so long because my first 3 years, my mind was still in the streets. I was still in the clubs. My body was in prison, but my mind and my attitude and everything about me was in the streets. I had plans to do luxury rentals, another money laundering case. I had planned to customize cars. I was going to be building spots, compartments. I had all of these plans, all were leading me back to prison. And after I had been on diesel therapy, where they fly you from Atlanta to Kansas to Terre Haute, Indiana to Oklahoma, you sit there, then you up in Wayne County. They had me on this diesel therapy where I hadn't seen a mirror in 7 months and 3 weeks. I didn't recognize myself when I looked in the mirror. I had lost 40 pounds and I'm a thin guy. During those times, they say you find God in prison. That's a lie. You didn't find God in prison. God was always with you. You just wasn't listening, So I started actually listening, and I started going to service regularly. I even sang in the choir. I made a joyful noise for God. And I started getting back with that network of friends when I was completely legal and I wasn't doing any crimes, and I had to change my circle. I had to change the way I walked. I had to change the way I talked. I had to change my mindset. And I had to get rid of those people in my life that were only going to enhance me going back to prison. And the truth, my son was my biggest inspiration for not going back to prison. He did more for me than I could ever do for him. He gave me something to live for. He gave me something that I knew. Oh, when I was on the streets, I was a great provider, but I was a poor father and a poor husband. I said if I was under a bridge with my son, I would be okay. And he really was the turning point for me, because I couldn't allow him to be out there without that man in his life. I couldn't.
That's right.
One of the other things that made me say that I wouldn't put myself back in prison, I took full accountability that I put myself in prison. Not, God bless you, Dawn Nyson, how you doing? You're a good sister. No hate here. You're doing your job, right? I put myself in prison. I took accountability. I didn't do the blame game. And it was one day I was at visitation, and my father's there. My father used to catch 2 buses and 2 trains to come see me. He used to bring my son. And we were at the table, and I seen my father's hand started shaking. I said, "Hey, what's up with your hand?" He kind of pulled his hand back. He said, "Oh, it's nothing, man." And then when I seen him and my son leaving for visit, my father was I didn't notice it before. My father was kind of bent over, and I could see him dragging his feet. That was the first time I saw that my father had Parkinson's. So I knew that nobody else was going to take care of him. And when my father died, his last breath, I was there. And my father and I lived together from the day I got out of prison. He picked me up with my son, and we lived together till he died. So that was one of the big reasons too.
Indeed. Huge. So that was 2010, May 27, 2010, when you got out. You were 38 years old. So then, you start working at a body shop. I remember when you were working at the body shop. So you started working at the body shop, and eventually you went into business with a crazy partner. I mean, a partner.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, crazy Mike.
love you, Mike. Yeah. And life was good, but then you had to fight to regain custody of your son. Can you talk a bit about the common returning citizen issue?
When I got out in 2010, I didn't have custody of my son. I had certain visitation, and things started to change. And it took everything in me with my ex-wife not to go back, not to revert to who I was. I had to make a decision. It was that pivotal point where does everybody die and I go to prison and my son loses because his grandmother's going to have to die, raise him, or do they kill me and my son loses again? So I had to go to court. I put myself on child support. And it was the worst feeling in the world because they took away some of my visitation, made me pay more money, but I had to. And this is a big thing for us returning citizens, us that are coming out of prison, that is possible. Because I've had custody since 2013. My son has made honor roll I don't know how many times. And to this day, he is a freshman at Morehouse College on a track scholarship and just made honor roll. So when they say it's not possible, I'm living proof that you can have organized crime in your background, you can have been in prison, but if you fight and you believe that it can happen, it may not happen the same way, but on Judgment Day, or when my son becomes a man, I can say I did everything I could to protect you. Everything I could to make sure that you were okay. And that's what every father wants. And I was fortunate that the judge allowed me to have custody in 2013. And I've had custody of him ever since. And this is 2023.
So in 2017, you were 45. You released Miles in the Life, the documentary. Tell us a bit about that briefly.
Miles in the Life, the redemption story of a BMF, Black Mafia family drug trafficker, is the documentary, a full feature documentary that we released. And it's about empowerment. It's about living in that crack house, what I went through, and shedding a light on my mother who was addicted to crack cocaine. And on this year, June 27th, 2023, she celebrates 25 years of sobriety, clean and sober from crack cocaine and from alcohol. I wanted the world to see that there's other people out there like us, that you could have lived in a crack house, you could have been to prison, you can still get custody, you can still marry a great woman, you can still have a relationship with your mother, and you can be who you want to be if you want to be that person. And it's going to take a lot of work, but I wanted to change the narrative. I wanted to control our intellectual property. I didn't want them telling our story because our story is always told by them. They always tell our story and they tell it the way they want to. We took back the power and we said, okay, look, we're going to lay this story out. We're not going to romanticize or make drug dealing seem cool. This is what happened. This is what I went through. And I had to go through these things to get to where I'm at now, but it's the possibility that this can happen. You're going to have to work hard. You're going to have them $2, healthy choice meals, but it can happen. You can have a good life.
2020, age 48, Terry is released from prison over COVID-19. Have you spoken to him?
No, I have not spoken to him, but I've sent great shout outs to him. Bless him and his family.
2021, you're age 49, BMF TV series premieres. What do you think of it?
I'm grateful that Meech and T are getting their flowers while they're alive. I'm grateful that our story gets to be told by somebody that looks like us. Selfishly, I'm grateful because as the BMF story skyrockets, my numbers go up. So as a byproduct, it makes Miles in the Life, plug, story of a BMF drug trafficker, more accessible. I'm hoping that there can be spin-off series, because there's more than just one story there. There's so many other stories within that can be told. And kudos to 50 for making it.
Are they planning on having a Miles character next season?
I don't know if they'll have a Miles character. It'll be the ultimate flattery. But it's no way they can't have a Miles character, because I've put the pressure on that my film was first, the first documentary by a BMF member that was a real member and not the police story or district attorney story. This is our story. So I was the first. Shout out to me. I'm just saying.
That's right. Big up.
So, yeah.
So what are your thoughts on Little Meech having the various issues he's been having? The $500,000 chain, most recently $500,000 BMF chain, being arrested for stealing the Richard Mille watch, the gun at the airport incident, and the sex video with the Selena Powell person.
What do I think about the things that have been going on with Little Meech, from the sex video, from the chain, from the watch, from allegedly the pistol at the airport? I believe he's young enough and he can recover. I believe that the world is his oyster. It's almost nothing he can't do. He can come back from that. I think, God willing, his father gets out sooner than later. Shout out to Big Meech. And that he can have that guidance over his son. And I pray that he has great people around him that can guide him and let him know that this trajectory, you can act to your deathbed. It's not like football, basketball, or tennis, where you've got a shelf life. You don't have a shelf life with acting. This can take you to places that you would never be able to get into, ever. And you can do this around the world and get paid for it.
That's right. That's right. So but don't blow it. Yeah.
You got it.
All right. So, I mean, you're already a award-winning documentary filmmaker. Tell us about your forthcoming project, The System, America's Epidemic.
I think The System, America's Epidemic will be the most profound documentary of 2023. It's about the system, and that the system isn't broken. It was never meant to succeed. The prison system is to house and incarcerate and not rehabilitate, no matter what the mission statement of the Federal Bureau of Prisons says, to enhance or to help healthy, law-abiding citizens. Let me give you an example. 24 hours in a day, 8,760 hours in a year. If you've been in prison for 10 years, that's 87,600 hours in a hyper-toxic, ultra-violent environment. What do you think that person is going to become? A super criminal. And you give them a 2-hour pre-release class. How dare you? How dare you insult us? How dare you do American citizens? Because we never stopped being citizens like that. So we take the approach from the prosecutor, from a jailer, from a successful returning citizen. We don't call ourselves ex-felons. We call ourselves returning citizens, but because we're returning back to society as a citizen. We take the perspective of a child of an incarcerated parent, and we get this whole story. We let the story tell itself, and we're trying to push the envelope to help returning citizens, because when that father or that mother is out of that family, that child is going to be in there next, and that cycle is just going to continue. So The System, America's Epidemic, it'll be out on all of the platforms, Amazon, Tubi, the Roku channel, Blaze, and all of those other streaming platforms. It's for us, by us, about us. And we're not making their story. We're doing our story. And yours truly, Mr. Cavario H, is a star in it. And I promise you a money-back guarantee on all of these millions of people that Vlad has watching this. If you don't like it, put a comment. I don't care, good or bad. Put a comment, tell me what you think, and let me know how we can do it better.
Jabari Miles Hayes, thank you very much. We appreciate you here on Vlad TV. You're my brother, and I love you. And I'm
you
wishing
back,
you nothing but the best. And congratulations on that new baby.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Vlad, for having a platform like this and for allowing little old me on your show. And if there's anything that we can do to help our returning citizens, I think it is our civic duty, because if we don't help that person, that 100+ billion that's spent on prisons is just going to keep going and going. So even if you don't care about criminals coming out of prison, care about them breaking into your house, care about that being the 11th largest federal expenditure, care about that person spending our government's money. If they're out there, they're paying taxes, there's a stronger family, those children won't go to prison, they won't be on public assistance, welfare, they won't be in prison. Even my Republican friends. Oh, and God bless America. That's a wrap. And cut. Slate, Jabari Hayes, 2023.